In late October, my girlfriend Stacy and I took a road trip to Stowe, Vermont. We rented a cabin through Glamping Hub, only about 20 minutes from the village. It was on a hilltop, offering a perfect view of the fall foliage, which was exactly why we planned the trip. We had the rental from Thursday night to Sunday. The cabin had a code lock system, and the owner sent me the combination before we arrived. It worked without a hitch. When we stepped inside, we looked around and found the place to be cozy and warm. Everything was made of wood, giving it that charming, old-fashioned country vibe. There was even a distinct smell that immediately reminded us of a traditional log cabin. The cabin had a bathroom, a small kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and a living room, more than enough space for just the 2 of us. There were 2 TVs, one in the master bedroom and another in the living room. There was, however, one door that was locked, which we assumed led to the 3rd bedroom mentioned in the ad. We didn't think much of it, figuring the owner probably had some personal belongings in there, especially since they knew it was just the 2 of us staying. We dropped most of our luggage in the 2nd bedroom to keep the master nice and tidy. Since it was late by the time we arrived on Thursday, we headed straight out for dinner in town, followed by a brief walk around the village before returning to the cabin. It was already late, so we called it a night after watching a movie. The next day, the weather was cloudy and chilly, so we went hiking along some dirt trails near the cabin. It was peaceful, and we spent a good chunk of the day exploring the woods. When we got back to the cabin, I showered and changed into something more fitting for dinner at a nice restaurant. As I stepped out of the shower, Stacy mentioned hearing something coming from behind the locked door, like a faint radio or recording. I pressed my ear against the door to listen, but it was quiet. I knocked on the door, mostly just to mess with Stacy because she found the idea creepy, and she begged me to stop. While she was in the shower, I was sitting in the living room watching TV when I thought I heard something faint coming from the locked room again. I muted the TV, went back to the door, and listened closely. Sure enough, there was a quiet sound, like someone speaking or a radio playing. I messaged the host about it and gave him a call. He said he wasn't sure why the door would be locked, but maybe his wife had left some things in there. As for the noise, he wasn't certain but said he'd ask her about it. After Stacy finished her shower, we went out for lunch. I didn't mention hearing the noise again, figuring it was just some electronic device left behind by the host's wife, and I didn't want to freak her out. We had lunch at a restaurant in town called Harrison's and spent the rest of the afternoon driving around the area. We even stopped at a park to relax for a bit. That's when the host called me back. He said his wife didn't lock anything in that room, and they couldn't figure out why it was locked or what was causing the noise. He offered to come by and unlock the door to check it out, and I agreed. So we headed back to the cabin, which took about 20 minutes. When we got back, Stacy was exhausted from the day and collapsed on the couch while I went to listen at the door again. I could still hear the same faint noises. I told Stacy I'd be right back and stepped outside. For some reason, I hadn't thought to check the window sooner. I walked over to the window of the locked bedroom and, standing on my tiptoes, peered inside. What I saw was terrifying. A grossly skinny, tall man in his 20s, wearing a hood, was slowly dancing in the middle of the room, holding what looked like a small radio in his hand. He spotted me almost immediately, stopped dancing, and smiled directly at me. I panicked and started yelling for Stacy, telling her to get out of the house. She met me at the door, confused and scared, and I shouted for her to just get in the car. I grabbed our 2 bags, leaving everything else behind, and threw them in the trunk before driving off. I called the host, telling him to contact the police because there was someone inside the house. About an hour later, while we were sitting in town, the host called back. He said the police had arrived, opened the locked room, and found no one inside. However, they did find several empty bags of chips under the bed, implying someone had been in there. We went back to collect the rest of our belongings and sorted out a refund with the host and the website. Needless to say, we didn't stay there any longer. We booked a room at a nearby motel and stayed there until Sunday before heading home. I'll never forget what I saw through that window. That skinny, dancing figure haunted my thoughts for days, and I couldn't sleep knowing that person had been in the house with us the whole time, even while we slept. It was a late Friday night in the middle of October, a rainy one, and of course, drinks were involved. I had been at this Halloween-themed housewarming party with my friends, but I didn't wear a costume since I had come straight from work, already feeling pretty wiped out. To wake myself up a bit, I took an Adderall and stopped at a gas station to grab some White Claws before heading over. The party was packed with around 25 to 30 people, and I ended up meeting a few folks I didn't know. The socializing and drinking helped keep me awake, but honestly, I was just ready to head home and crash. Working in a hospital has me on these crazy hours, so my sleep schedule is all over the place. Eventually, I saw a chance to slip out quietly through the backyard without saying goodbye to a crowd of 20 people. An Irish goodbye felt like the move. Looking back, I really shouldn't have driven with alcohol in my system, and I don't recommend anyone do that. Always call an Uber if you need a ride. But that night, I ran through the rain, hopped into my Subaru, and started driving. No music, just the sound of the rain hitting the windshield, exactly the peace and quiet I wanted. As I was driving down this quiet residential road, I noticed a girl walking in the rain. No umbrella, no jacket, nothing. When I got closer, she stopped walking and looked toward my car. I let out a sigh, debating whether to just keep going, but my compassionate side told me to pull over. I rolled down my window and asked if she needed a ride. Without saying a word, she got into the back seat. I asked where she was headed, and she said just down to the end of the road, so I started driving in that direction. At the second stop sign, I asked why she was walking out in the rain like that, and she simply said she was in a rush and didn't feel like calling a cab. I made a joke about how expensive cabs and Ubers are, trying to lighten the mood. I introduced myself as Jake, and she said her name was Ollie. After thanking me for the ride, the conversation just ended, and we rode in silence. As we approached the dead-end sign, I slowed down and asked, "Is it past the dead end?" No answer. Halfway through the intersection, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my heart dropped. She wasn't there. I slammed on the brakes and turned around, but the back seat was empty. I pulled over to the side of the road and jumped out of the car, frantically checking the back seat and the floor. No sign of her anywhere. I even looked down the road, which was lit by the occasional streetlight, no one in sight. But there was no way she could have gotten out without me hearing the door open or close. The car had been silent. At that point, I started doubting myself, questioning if I had imagined the whole thing. I reached down to feel the seat where she'd been sitting. It was completely dry. Given how much it was raining, her seat should have been wet. I stood there in the rain, just frozen, feeling confused and uneasy. As I scanned the area again, I noticed a fence to the right of my car, and beyond it was a cemetery. Then, her words from earlier hit me. When I had asked where she was going, she said, "Down to the end of the road." I looked at the cemetery, realizing it was right at the end of that road. Without wasting another second, I jumped back into my car, did a 3-point turn, and drove home as quickly as I could. I don't think I was drunk enough to be hallucinating.